Okay, now in 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the Wittenberg door, starting the Protestant Reformation and cracking the facade of a unified European church. And the Catholics were, not big fans of the Protestants. But about 30 years after the Protestant Reformation started, the Catholics started rethinking things. I mean, don't get me wrong, Protestants are still dumb, but, you know, maybe some of their complaints are valid. So in this video, we're going to look at what the Catholics did in response to these Protestant complaints. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. So in response to Protestant complaints against the Catholic Church, the Catholics underwent their own Reformation, and it's known as the Catholic Reformation, or sometimes you'll hear it called the Counter Reformation or the Catholic Counter Reformation, you know, same thing. So now the Protestants were clearly gaining ground in Europe, and maybe more importantly, gaining power. How would the Catholic Church respond? Well, one of the first initiatives was the establishment of the Jesuit order. This was a group established by Ignatius of Loyola, whose purpose was to educate the church. They established some of the finest educational institutions across Europe on the assumption that if Catholics were better able to use their thinky parts, they would be less likely to fall prey to Protestant doctrine. The Jesuits were also responsible for the Roman Inquisition, which was established to root out heretics among the church. And by root out, I mean, you know. Anyway, the Inquisition was responsible for creating the Index of Prohibited Books, which is exactly what it sounds like. It was a list of all the books that the church said were forbidden for Catholics to read. Not surprisingly, all the Protestant reformers made it on the list, as did folks like Galileo and even Erasmus. And there were other orders established as well. The Jesuits were all dudes, but the Ursulines, who were a female order, had much the same purpose. Like the Jesuits, they focused on educating Catholics, especially young girls. And like the Jesuits, the Ursulines had a missionary impulse to carry the teachings of Christ throughout the world in missionary efforts. Then came St. Teresa of Avila, who reformed the Carmelite order of the church. Under Teresa's leadership, the Carmelites rejected the affluence that had corrupted the church and adopted a life of prayer and poverty. So you can see that the Catholic Church is busy cleaning up its own house with the establishment of new religious orders. But probably the most significant manifestation of the Catholic Reformation was the Council of Trent, whose goal was to resolve the differences between Protestants and Catholics. Now, let's remind ourselves of some of the complaints that the Protestants leveled against the Catholic Church. They complained about the practice of simony, which was the buying and selling of church offices. They complained about the immorality of priests and bishops. And most of all, Protestants complained about the sale of indulgences, which people bought to secure the forgiveness of their sins. And on the flip side, which also financed church building projects. So by 1545, Pope Paul III called the Council of Trent to address these issues. This council met intermittently until 1563, and the council took a hard look at the church and made a few significant decisions. First, they suppressed the practice of simony. Second, they reestablished the celibacy of the priesthood. And third, they cleaned up the practice of the sale of indulgences. They didn't say indulgences could not be sold, but they did say that they couldn't be sold to pay for the Pope's beach house. So at this point, you know, it's looking like the Catholics and the Protestants are on the same page, and I'm sure a healing of this great rift is at hand. Yeah, no. In addition to cleaning up these corrupt practices, the Council of Trent also reaffirmed traditional Catholic doctrine. They affirmed that salvation comes by faith and works, not just faith like the Protestants claim. They affirmed the doctrine of transubstantiation, which said that the bread and wine served in the Mass actually became the flesh and blood of Christ, which the Protestants denied. They affirmed the 7 sacraments of the church, whereas the Protestants only affirmed 2. They affirmed the equal authority of the Bible and church dogma, whereas the Protestants only believed in the ultimate authority of the Bible alone. So with these affirmations of the Council of Trent, that giant ecclesiastical hug Catholics and Protestants were about to give each other was torn apart. And so with the Council of Trent, the split between the Catholics and the Protestants was made permanent. Alright, you should definitely go right here next and watch the rest of my videos on Unit 2. And click here to grab my AP Euro review pack, which is going to carry you to an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May. I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.